The room was silent. A large screen on the wall. Rows of people in suits. Someone whispered my name. Then the list appeared. And there it was. My name. Right there. Forbes 30 under 30. My phone started vibrating immediately. Messages. Notifications. Calls. But one thought kept repeating in my mind. My parents would see this. The same parents who once said I would never succeed. The same people who told relatives I was wasting my life with computers. The same people who laughed when I left home with a laptop and one suitcase. I stared at the screen. And something didn't feel right. Because the first call that came in wasn't congratulations. It was from my father. And the first thing he said was, "Why are reporters calling our house?" That's when I realized something was very wrong. A few years earlier, my life looked very different. I was the quiet kid in the family. Not the favorite. Not the one they bragged about. My younger brother was the star. He studied business. My parents told everyone he would run companies one day. Me. I sat in my room coding. Building small apps. Fixing bugs. Learning systems. My parents called it a little computer hobby. They didn't mean it kindly. At family dinners, my father liked to make jokes. So, still playing with that laptop? Relatives laughed. My mother would add something softer, but not better. He's a good boy. Just, not very practical. I stopped explaining my work a long time ago. Because explaining didn't change anything. What they saw was simple. No fancy office. No suit. No visible success. Just a quiet kid staring at a screen. What they didn't see was everything happening online. The contracts. The small clients. The freelance work that slowly turned into a company. The software platform I was building at night. At first it made almost nothing. Then it made a little. Then it started growing faster than I expected. But I didn't tell my family. Not because I was hiding it. Because they weren't interested. And honestly, that was easier. Life stayed simple. Work. Coffee. Code. Late nights. Occasional sleep. Months passed. Then one day something strange happened. My father called me. Which almost never happened. He sounded unusually cheerful. "Your mother and I were talking," he said. "You should come visit this weekend." That alone felt unusual. But then he added something else. There might be a few important guests at dinner. Important guests. My parents rarely hosted anyone. I assumed maybe relatives. Maybe someone from my brother's business school. So I agreed. When I arrived that weekend, the house felt different. Clean. Prepared. Almost staged. My brother was wearing a suit. My mother kept checking the table. My father looked unusually excited. Then I heard the name. A tech investor. Someone I recognized instantly. Not famous to the public. But in my world, very big. My father leaned toward me and said proudly, "My friend invited him." Friend. My father didn't have friends in tech. Something didn't add up. During dinner, the investor kept looking at me. Not casually. Like he recognized something. Finally he asked one question. "Wait, you're the developer behind that platform, right?" The room went quiet. My parents looked confused. My brother frowned. My father laughed awkwardly. "Platform?" The investor smiled slightly. "The one my firm invested millions into last year." Forks stopped moving. My mother looked at me. My father slowly turned his head. For the first time in years, they were actually paying attention. But what happened next was even stranger. Instead of reacting with pride, my father looked irritated. Then he said something that made the entire table uncomfortable. "Well, if that's true, he never told us." The investor replied calmly. "Most founders prefer to let their work speak." Dinner ended strangely. But that wasn't the moment everything changed. The real shift came months later. The Forbes nomination process started quietly. Interviews. Verification. Financial documents. Company records. Everything private. Until the day the list went public. That morning, my phone exploded with notifications. Messages from colleagues, investors, friends I hadn't heard from in years. Then the call from my father came. Not congratulations. Not pride. Just one sharp question. Why are reporters calling our house? His tone wasn't confused. It sounded angry. Then my mother took the phone. You embarrassed your brother. That sentence didn't make sense. I asked why. She said something strange. You made it look like you're the successful one. I thought she was joking. But she wasn't. The call ended quickly. That night I received a message from a journalist. A screenshot. An article draft. And a quote from my father. A quote I had never heard before. He had told reporters something very specific. Something completely false. Something that could damage my company. Something that made it sound like I had used family money to build everything. Which wasn't true. Not even close. At first I thought it was just a misunderstanding. But then another reporter sent a recording. My father's voice. Clear. Calm. Confident. And lying. That's when I realized something. This wasn't pride. This wasn't confusion. My parents weren't celebrating my success. They were trying to control it. And possibly, claim it. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. At first, I assumed it was just one bad interview. A misunderstanding. Reporters sometimes misquote people. So I asked the journalist to send the full audio. He did. It wasn't a misunderstanding. My father's voice was calm and confident. He said my company had been supported by family funding from the beginning. He said my brother had helped guide the business strategy. He even suggested that the original idea had come from family discussions. None of that was true. Not one word. My company started with $1,200 from freelance work. Every server. Every hire. Every contract. All of it came from revenue I generated myself. My family had never invested a dollar. In fact, they barely knew what I did. The reporter probably assumed my father was telling the truth. After all, parents usually brag about their children. They don't rewrite the entire story. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I asked the journalist a simple question. Did anyone else speak to you? He paused. Then he said yes. My brother. That part surprised me. The journalist sent another recording. My brother sounded confident. Comfortable. He explained how he had mentored me during the early days. How he had helped refine the product direction. How the company's success was really a family effort. Listening to it felt strange. Not anger. Just a slow, quiet realization. They were building a narrative. And they were doing it publicly. But that wasn't the worst part. A day later, another message arrived. This time from someone inside an investment firm. A short email. 3 lines. He wrote, "Your father contacted our office yesterday. He said your family represents your company. He asked about partnership opportunities." I read that email 3 times. My father had never been involved in my business. Not legally. Not financially. Not operationally. But he was contacting investors anyway. Presenting himself as a representative. That wasn't just embarrassing. It was dangerous. Because if investors believed him, it could create legal confusion. Authority. Ownership. Control. And once that kind of misunderstanding spreads, it's hard to correct. So I started collecting everything. Every email. Every interview transcript. Every audio recording. The journalist sent me their notes. My brother's statements were even more specific there. He claimed he had helped secure early clients. Which was impossible. The clients were all companies I met through developer communities. People my brother had never spoken to. But the most important evidence came from a third reporter. She had spoken to my mother. Her recording was shorter. But it explained everything. My mother laughed softly during the interview. Then she said, "Well, our older son isn't very business-minded." Pause. But his brother understands money. Another pause. He'll probably manage things eventually. That sentence sat in my head for a long time. Not because it hurt, but because it revealed the plan. They weren't just talking. They were positioning. If the public believed my company was a family project, then it wouldn't seem strange if my brother appeared later as the business leader, slowly taking control, quietly replacing me. And the more successful the company became, the easier that narrative would be to sell. I sat at my desk that night for hours. My apartment was silent. Only the soft hum of servers running in the background. I thought about calling my parents, confronting them, asking why. But every version of that conversation ended the same way. Denial. Excuses. More lies. And if they knew I had evidence, they would stop talking to reporters. The trail would disappear. So instead of confronting them, I started documenting everything. The recordings. The emails. The article drafts. Then something unexpected arrived. A legal inquiry. From a venture capital firm. They wanted to verify something. Apparently my father had told them the family was preparing to restructure company leadership. Which meant one thing. He wasn't just telling stories anymore. He was trying to influence business decisions. That crossed a line. Not emotionally. Legally. Because if investors believed him, it could damage contracts, ownership agreements, even my control of the company. The firm asked a simple question. Is your father an authorized representative of the company? My answer was one sentence. No. But that wasn't enough. Because the firm had already heard something else. They had heard the family narrative. The one my parents and brother were spreading. I could already see what would happen next. If I argued publicly, it would become a messy family dispute. Headlines. Drama. Speculation. And that kind of noise can destroy companies. Especially young ones. So I made a decision. I would not confront them. Not yet. Instead, I would gather every piece of proof. Every recording. Every message. Every witness. Because when the time came, emotion wouldn't matter. Only evidence would. And once the full picture was clear, the truth would speak for itself. Confronting them would have ruined everything. Once the pattern was clear, I stopped treating it like a family problem. I treated it like a business risk. The first thing I did was secure everything. Every recording from the journalists. Every email from investors. Every message where my father had presented himself as a representative. I downloaded copies. Then I made backups. One on an encrypted drive. One on a secure cloud archive. And another with my legal team. I didn't tell my parents any of this. From their perspective, nothing had changed. That was important. Because people only reveal the full extent of a plan when they believe it's working. The next step was documentation. My lawyer asked for everything related to the company's origin. Bank transfers. Early invoices. Freelance payments. Server receipts. Domain registrations. GIT commit histories. Even the first prototype files. We built a timeline. Every month. Every contract. Every financial source. The result was simple and undeniable. The company had been built entirely by me. No family money. No outside control. No shared ownership. Just one founder. The lawyer looked over the documents quietly. Then he asked a question. Do your parents have any signed agreements with you? No. Any financial investment? No. Any advisory contracts? No. He nodded slowly. That makes things very clear. But clarity alone wasn't enough. Because the problem wasn't ownership. The problem was representation. My father was speaking to investors as if he had authority, which could potentially qualify as misrepresentation, or even attempted fraud if it influenced decisions. My lawyer suggested something careful. We wouldn't accuse anyone yet. Instead, we would let the evidence correct the situation. Quietly. Professionally. First, we contacted the venture firm that had received my father's proposal. Not emotionally. Just documentation. Ownership records. Legal structure. Founder agreements. The firm replied within hours. Their message was short. Understood. Thank you for clarifying. Then my lawyer asked another question. Do you know how many investors he contacted? I didn't. But we soon found out. 3 firms. 2 journalists. 1 conference organizer. And 1 potential client. Each one had received some version of the same story. That the company was a family project. That leadership might shift soon. That my brother would likely handle the business side. The language was careful. But the direction was clear. They were preparing the ground. The more I read the emails, the calmer I became. Because the pattern was obvious. And patterns are easy to prove. My lawyer suggested one more step. Let them keep talking. At first that sounded strange. But he explained. If we corrected the story immediately, they would simply deny everything. But if they continued speaking publicly, the contradictions would multiply. More witnesses. More records. More proof. So we waited. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more journalists contacted me. Each one asking the same question. Is your brother joining leadership? That question alone told me the narrative was spreading. But instead of correcting it immediately, I responded carefully. No leadership changes are planned. Short. Professional. Nothing emotional. Meanwhile, my lawyer was preparing something else. A formal clarification notice. Not a lawsuit. Just a legal document establishing the facts. Ownership. Representation. Authority. It would only be used if necessary. But it existed. And copies were ready. Then something unexpected happened. My parents invited me to dinner again. The same house. The same dining room. The same polished table. But this time the guest list was different. 2 investors. And a journalist. My father greeted me at the door like nothing was wrong. Perfect timing, he said. You should join us. My brother was already there. Relaxed. Confident. Like someone who believed the future was already decided. During dinner, the journalist asked simple questions. About the company. About growth. About leadership. My father answered most of them. Comfortably. Confidently. Exactly the way he had in the recordings. Then he said something very specific. Eventually the business side will probably shift to my younger son. He said it casually. Like it was already understood. The journalist nodded. Writing it down. The investors watched quietly. And I realized something important. My parents thought they were controlling the story. But they didn't realize something else had changed. Every word in that room was now being documented. Not just by journalists. But by lawyers. And witnesses. And the companies that had already received our clarification documents. So I stayed calm. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I didn't correct anything. I simply watched the conversation unfold. Because the moment that mattered was coming soon. And everyone at that table would see it happen at the same time. They thought it was just another dinner. Just another chance to shape the narrative. Just another step in their plan. They thought it was just another day. It wasn't. The dinner lasted almost 2 hours. Nothing dramatic happened. No raised voices. No arguments. Just quiet conversation. My father spoke confidently the entire time. He described the company as if he had watched it grow from the inside. My brother nodded occasionally, adding small comments about future strategy. The investors mostly listened. The journalist took notes. I spoke only when someone asked me something directly. Short answers. Clear facts. Nothing more. From the outside, the dinner probably looked normal. But something had already shifted before anyone sat down. Earlier that afternoon, my lawyer had sent out the clarification notice. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't accuse anyone of anything. It simply established the facts. The company had one founder. One owner. One authorized representative. And that representative was me. Attached to the document were the records. Formation documents. Equity structure. Financial history. Original development files. Early client contracts. Every detail that showed exactly how the company had been built. Those documents were sent to the same investors my father had contacted. They were also sent to the journalist attending the dinner. Quietly. Professionally. Without drama. Which meant something important. By the time everyone arrived at the table, they already knew the truth. My father didn't realize that. He continued speaking the way he had in interviews. Confident. Certain. Near the end of dinner, the journalist finally asked a question. Not to my father. To me. Just to clarify, she said calmly. There's been some confusion about company leadership. The room went quiet. My father leaned back slightly. My brother watched me carefully. The investors looked toward the center of the table. I answered simply. There's no confusion. Then I placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of the same documents my lawyer had sent earlier. The journalist opened it first. She flipped through the pages slowly. Then one of the investors reached over. He scanned the first few documents. Formation records. Ownership certificates. Legal filings. After a few seconds, he nodded. Everything seems clear. My father looked confused. What is this? He asked. The investor answered calmly. It's the ownership structure. Another quiet moment passed. My father tried to smile. Well, of course, we all know it's his company. But the journalist didn't write that down. Instead, she asked another question. This also confirms there's no family ownership involved. Correct? Yes, I said. None. My brother shifted in his chair. My father didn't say anything. Because there wasn't anything left to say. The narrative they had been building collapsed quietly. No argument. No confrontation. Just documentation. A few minutes later the conversation moved on. But the tone had changed. The investors spoke directly to me now. Not to my father. The journalist asked about product development. Not family involvement. The story had corrected itself. Dinner ended peacefully. Everyone stood. Polite goodbyes. Professional handshakes. The investors thanked me for the clarification. The journalist said she would update the article accordingly. My father walked them to the door. He looked smaller somehow. Not angry. Just confused. Like someone who suddenly realized the ground had moved beneath his feet. My brother didn't say much either. Because the future they had been quietly describing no longer existed. A few days later the article was published. It focused on the company, the product, the growth, and the founder. Me. There was no mention of family ownership. No reference to my brother guiding the company. No quotes from my father. Just facts. Clean and simple. After that, the calls stopped. No more reporters contacting my parents. No more emails from investors asking about family leadership. The story had settled where it belonged. With the truth. I didn't cut my parents out of my life. I didn't make a public statement. I didn't argue with them. Because none of that was necessary. The only thing that mattered was protecting what I built. And once the facts were clear, everything else became quiet again. Late that evening, after the article went live, I sat alone in my apartment. The same desk. The same laptop. The same quiet hum of servers running in the background. Outside, the city lights were steady and calm. No messages. No reporters. No noise. Just the work. The way it had always been. And the way it would stay. That night, everything was quiet.